Number 8. He was a slave master. Although Muslims in modern times romanticize Muhammad as somebody who gave slaves better rights and emancipated slaves, that is a very new perspective and actually a distortion of who Muhammad was. Slavery and the slave market were always a big part, a core part of Muslim society, and Muhammad never ended or intended to end slavery. In fact, if we search through Islamic traditions about Muhammad and slavery, what we see is predominantly that Muhammad kept, bought, and sold slaves, picked out slaves, took or distributed female slaves for sexual pleasure, and even advised gifting a slave to someone else instead of freeing a slave. What is true is that a certain early Muslim, Bilal, was a slave and that he was bought and freed by the Muslims because he converted to Islam and he was asking for help. What is also true is that Muhammad and the Quran make it a good deed or an atonement for sins to free a slave. But just because freeing a slave is a good deed or an atonement in exchange for sin, that doesn't mean that slavery is considered bad and that people are obligated to free slaves. Muhammad is the best example of Islam, according to Islam, and he certainly did not have a problem with the idea of the ownership of humans over other humans.
In this video, I'll be addressing another common misconception about Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and Islam, the allegation that the Prophet, peace be upon him, was a slave master who condoned and even promoted slavery. This claim is not only false, but shows a lack of understanding of the historical context, the nature of slavery at the time, and how Islam worked toward the gradual elimination of slavery. Let's set the record straight. Before Islam, slavery was common in almost every society in the world, including Arabia, Rome, Persia, India, and Africa. Slaves were often treated like objects with no rights, and slavery was an important part of the economy. If slavery was completely stopped overnight, it would have caused big problems, especially because many people, including women and children, depended on the system to survive. Islam, as a complete way of life, didn't bring sudden changes that could create more harm than good. Instead, it made gradual changes to ensure fairness and justice over time. Think about it. If slavery was suddenly banned, thousands of people, including women and children, would be left without food or support in a society that depended on this system. Islam, therefore, took the wise approach. It changed slavery by giving more rights to slaves while working toward ending the practice completely. Let's see how Islam did this. Islam understood that slavery was complicated, so instead of stopping it instantly, it worked on ending its main causes. 1. Kidnapping and human trafficking. One of the main causes of slavery before Islam was kidnapping and selling people as slaves. Islam completely banned this in the Quran. Quran 20:33 says, "Force not your slave girls to prostitution. If they desire chastity, this ensured that no person could be forced into slavery." Quran 5:38. Warned against stealing and kidnapping. This stopped the practice of taking free people and making them slaves. Point 2. Prisoners of war. Islam allowed slavery only for prisoners of war, as a better option than killing them. At that time, prisoners of war could be killed or left to die, but Islam allowed them to live in society with rights and dignity. These prisoners were often treated like family members instead of slaves, and Islam strongly encouraged freeing them. Islam's plan was to end slavery over time, in a way that would benefit both the slaves and the slave owners. Here's how. Freeing a slave was considered one of the greatest acts of kindness and a way to make up for sins. For example, in Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, freeing a slave was mentioned as a way to atone for sins like breaking an oath or accidentally killing someone. Some critics argue that Islam allowed female captives to be used for sexual purposes. This is a blatant misinterpretation. Let's clear this up. 1. Honorable treatment of female captives. Female captives were given full protection under Islamic law, and it was forbidden to exploit them. Sexual relations with a captive could only happen within the bounds of marriage or with full mutual consent. The Quran commands that captives be treated with kindness and justice. There was no permission to abuse captives in any way. 2. Example of Safiya. Safiya bint Huyai was a captive after a battle, but the Prophet, peace be upon him, freed her and gave her the choice of remaining a free woman or marrying him. She chose to marry the Prophet, and he treated her with the same love and respect as his other wives. Finally, let's address the claim that Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, kept slaves for personal gain. This is another distortion of the facts. Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, freed numerous slaves during his lifetime, including his beloved companion, Zayd ibn Haritha, who chose to stay with the Prophet after being freed because of the love and care he received. Islam and the Prophet, peace be upon him, never saw slaves as inferior. In fact, former slaves like Bilal ibn Rabah, a freed Ethiopian slave, were given leadership roles in the Muslim community. Bilal became the first muezzin caller to prayer, and was highly respected among the companions. The claim that Prophet Muhammad PBUH was a slave master who perpetuated slavery is not only false, but a distortion of historical reality. Islam took a gradual, humane approach to slavery that focused on improving the conditions of slaves, treating them with respect, and encouraging their freedom. It phased out the institution of slavery by attacking its sources and promoting justice and equality for all people. Islam was revolutionary in its teachings about slaves, granting them rights, dignity, and eventual freedom. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was not a slave master, but a liberator and reformer, working within the constraints of his time to bring about long-lasting change. Assalamu alaikum.